Amara did not cry when her father told her. She had learned a long time ago that tears were a luxury she could not afford around him. She sat across from him at the small kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg that he had never bothered to fix, and she listened to him explain, in a calm and steady voice, that her life had been decided for her. The man she was to marry was King Darius Voss. The wedding was in 4 weeks. There was nothing to discuss. She was 23 years old. She had a nursing license she had worked for through 3 years of grueling study, and 2 years of hospital shifts that started before sunrise and ended long after dark. She had a small apartment with a window that faced east, and she loved that window because the morning light came through it clean and honest every single day. She had a life. It was small, maybe, compared to the lives other people talked about wanting, but it was hers. Every corner of it was hers. And in the space of one conversation, sitting at a table with a wobbly leg, it stopped being hers. Her father's name was Gerald Voss, not the king, a distant cousin of the Voss family, a man who had spent his entire adult life trying to climb closer to the power he had been born near but never inside. He had 3 daughters. Amara was the middle one, the quietest one, the one who had always made the least trouble. He told her, without looking at her directly, that this arrangement was an honor, that the king had specifically requested a woman from within the extended family, that her compliance would benefit everyone. Everyone, Amara said. Everyone, he confirmed. She looked at her hands on the table. Her knuckles were dry from all the washing she did at the hospital. She thought about the shift she was supposed to work the following morning. She thought about the elderly man in room 7 who always asked her, when she came in to check his IV line, whether she had eaten breakfast yet. She thought about how small and specific that kindness was, and how much it meant to her. Then she stood up, said nothing, and walked to her room. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark and listened to the city sounds outside her window, and tried to put together, piece by piece, everything she knew about King Darius Voss. It was not much. He was 31 years old. He had ruled the northern territories for 6 years, since the death of his father. He had a reputation that stretched far beyond the north, a reputation built not on cruelty for its own sake, people said, but on an absolute refusal to be soft about anything. Laws were laws. Consequences were consequences. He did not negotiate. He did not make exceptions. He did not bend. There were other things people said, quieter things, that his court was cold, that people who displeased him disappeared from public life so completely, it was as though they had never existed, that he had been engaged twice before, and both women had found reasons to withdraw before the wedding ever happened. No one said out loud what had made those women so eager to leave, but the silence around that particular detail said enough. Amara stared at the ceiling for hours. At some point during the night, she made a decision. She was not going to fall apart. She was not going to spend the next 4 weeks drowning in fear, or grief, or anger. She was going to do what she had always done, which was to look at a hard situation with clear eyes and figure out how to survive it. She showed up for her shift the next morning. She was 14 minutes early. The weeks that followed were strange, in a way she had not expected. On the surface, everything looked the same. She went to work. She took care of her patients. She came home. She made dinner. She slept. But underneath all of that, running like a quiet current she could not switch off, was the awareness that a clock was counting down. Every morning she woke up, there was one fewer day between her and the palace gates. Her sister, Lydia, called her twice. Lydia was the oldest, sharp-tongued and practical, and she had opinions about everything. On the first call, she told Amara to think of it as an opportunity. On the second call, when Amara was very quiet for a very long time, Lydia stopped talking about opportunities and just stayed on the line, and that was better. Her younger sister, Nora, sent a voice message that was 3 minutes long and mostly crying. Amara listened to it twice and then did not listen to it again because it made the thing in her chest tighten in a way she couldn't afford. She told her closest friend at the hospital, a woman named Clara, who had been a nurse for 12 years and had seen nearly everything, what was happening. Clara was the only person she told outside of family. Clara listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Clara, and when Amara finished, Clara poured them both a cup of bad hospital coffee and said, "You are the most capable person I have ever met. I'm not saying this is fine. It is not fine, but you are going to be all right." Amara held on to that sentence for the next 3 weeks like it was something solid. 2 weeks before the wedding, a woman arrived at her father's house. She was from the palace, a senior attendant named Helen, polished and efficient, with the kind of posture that suggested she had been trained since childhood never to look uncertain. Helen carried a leather folder full of documents. She sat across from Amara at the same wobbly table and went through every item with a precise and businesslike tone. There were contracts about property and title. There were pages about conduct and expectations within the court. There was a schedule for fittings, for meetings with the palace communications team, for a formal introduction to the king's senior council. Amara read every document, slowly, carefully, the way she read medical charts. She asked questions. Helen answered them all without blinking. At the end, Helen closed the folder and looked at Amara for the first time with something other than professional neutrality. "You are handling this well," she said, and it sounded less like a compliment and more like an observation she hadn't quite meant to say out loud. "Am I?" Amara said. Helen stood up and tucked the folder under her arm. "Most don't," she said, and she left. Amara sat at the table after Helen left and thought about that for a while. The week before the wedding, she packed up her apartment. She had not been told to do so. The documents had said her personal belongings would be transferred, but she wanted to do it herself. She wrapped her books carefully and put them in boxes. She took down the curtain she had made herself for the east-facing window, the white one with the small embroidered edge, because she was not going to leave it for whoever came next. She labeled every box in her neat, precise handwriting. She stood in the empty apartment on the last evening and looked at the marks on the wall where her shelves had been, and thought about the fact that she was 23 years old, and she had made a life here, and now she was going to leave it, without being asked whether she wanted to. She was angry. She had been keeping the anger below the surface for weeks, using it carefully, letting it power her through the long days, without letting it spill into anything she couldn't take back. Standing in that empty room, she let herself feel it properly for about 60 seconds. It was big, and hot, and completely justified. Then she put it back where she kept it, and picked up the last box. The morning of the wedding, she dressed in the room they had given her at a formal guest house near the palace. The actual palace accommodations were apparently to be assigned after the ceremony. The dress had been chosen for her, a deep ivory with clean lines and no excess decoration. It was, she admitted to herself, beautiful. But she had not chosen it, and that fact sat in the corner of her mind like a stone she kept bumping into. Helen was there, along with 2 other attendants she had not met before. They worked quietly and efficiently. One of them, a young woman named Petra, pinned the last piece of Amara's hair into place with very gentle hands, and then met her eyes in the mirror and gave her a small, brief smile. It was not a smile that said everything is fine. It was a smile that said, "I see you." Amara was grateful for the difference. She had not met Darius yet. That struck her, as the car moved toward the palace, as a strange fact. She was an hour away from marrying a man whose face she had only seen in photographs, official photographs, carefully composed, that told her almost nothing about him, except that he was tall, that his expression was very controlled, and that his eyes were a specific shade of gray, that the photographs probably did not capture accurately. She was trying not to think about what the evening would bring. She had made herself stop thinking about it, because the thinking led nowhere useful. She had done what she always did, when she was afraid of something she could not control, which was to make herself focus on the next 5 minutes. Right now, the next 5 minutes were the car ride. After that, it would be walking through the doors. After that, it would be whatever came next. The palace came into view through the car window, and her breath left her body for a moment, just for a moment, because it was larger than the photographs had made it look. Stone and iron, and old windows that caught the morning light in a way that was somehow both cold and beautiful at the same time. She breathed in slowly and breathed out. She was not going to fall apart. She had decided. The ceremony took place in the palace's formal hall, a long room with high ceilings and walls lined with portraits of people who all looked, to varying degrees, like they had never once in their lives been asked to do something they did not want to do. There were 200 guests, most of them strangers to her. She recognized a few people from her father's world, men and women who existed in the orbit of old money and older politics. She did not look at her father during the ceremony. She looked at Darius. He was standing at the front of the room when she walked in, and the first thing she noticed was that he was already looking at her. Not in a dramatic way, not with any particular expression she could read. He was simply watching her walk toward him with calm, steady attention, as though she were something he was trying to understand. He was taller than she had expected from the photographs. His suit was dark and impeccably fitted. His hair was dark, cut close on the sides, and his eyes, when she finally got close enough to see them properly, were not quite gray. They were something between gray and green, changeable in a way that made it hard to pin down. He did not smile when she reached him, but he looked at her like she was a real person, and after weeks of feeling like a piece being moved across a board, that simple fact knocked her slightly off balance. They stood next to each other. The officiant spoke. Amara answered when she was supposed to answer and signed what she was supposed to sign, and at no point did her voice break or her hands shake visibly, and she counted that as a significant personal achievement. It was done in under 40 minutes. There was a dinner that followed, formal and long, full of toasts and a kind of brittle celebration that had the energy of people performing a script they had rehearsed. Darius sat beside her. He ate in a measured way and spoke when spoken to by his council members and advisors, and he did not ignore Amara, but he did not make a show of paying attention to her either. At one point, when one of the senior council members across the table made a comment that was dressed up as a compliment but was actually pointed, Amara watched Darius turn his gray-green eyes on the man with an expression that did not change at all, and the man immediately found something else to talk about. She found that interesting. Toward the end of the dinner, Darius leaned slightly toward her and said quietly, "The fish course was overcooked. I apologize." She blinked at him. "I did not notice," she said, which was a lie, but a small one. "I notice everything that happens in this house," he said, not unkindly, just as a statement of fact. She did not know what to say to that. He did not seem to expect her to say anything. He turned back to the table, and the dinner continued. Later, when it was over and she was finally shown to the rooms that were to be hers, large, well-furnished, quiet rooms at the east end of the palace, which she noticed faced east the way her apartment window had, she sat on the edge of the bed and felt the full weight of the day settle onto her shoulders. She was inside the palace now. She was married. The life she had built was behind her. Whatever was ahead of her, she did not yet know the shape of it. A knock at the door made her go still. She waited, but no one came in. A few seconds later, she heard footsteps moving away down the corridor. She got up and opened the door. The corridor was empty. On the floor just outside was a small folded note. She picked it up and opened it. The handwriting was very controlled, each letter placed with deliberate precision. It said, "Rest tonight. You are safe here. No one will disturb you. There is a morning meeting of the council at 9. You are not required to attend. If you would like tea sent to your rooms, tell the attendant at the end of the hall." It was not signed. It did not need to be. Amara stood in the doorway of her new rooms, holding the note with both hands, and read it 3 more times. She had prepared herself for many things. She had prepared herself for coldness, for indifference, for the casual cruelty of someone who saw her as a political arrangement, and nothing more. She had packed her expectations tight and kept them low, because that was how she had survived hard things before. She had not prepared for this. She folded the note carefully, went back inside, and sat down on the bed again. The room was quiet. The palace was enormous and old and full of people she did not know, and a history she was not part of. Her apartment was gone. Her window was gone. Her morning shifts and Clara's bad coffee and the old man in room 7 who asked if she had eaten breakfast. All of it was behind her now, on the other side of a door she could not walk back through. But she was safe. Someone had told her she was safe, and for reasons she could not yet fully explain, she believed it. She lay down and closed her eyes. She did not sleep quickly, but she slept eventually, and when she woke up the following morning, the light was coming through the east-facing windows, clean and honest and exact, and she lay still for a moment and simply let it. Then she got up. She had things to figure out. She had always been good at figuring things out. She started there. The note stayed folded inside the small inner pocket of Amara's bag for the next several days. She did not know why she kept it. She was a practical person, and she was not in the habit of holding on to things for sentimental reasons. But she kept it, and on the mornings when the weight of everything pressed down on her before she had even fully woken up, she sometimes took it out and read it again, not because the words changed, but because the existence of it reminded her that the first night had not gone the way she had feared. The palace was a world that had its own rules, its own rhythms, its own invisible lines that everyone around her seemed to know by instinct. Amara had spent 2 years learning the rhythms of a hospital ward, which was also a world with its own invisible lines, and she understood that the only way to navigate a place like this was to watch carefully and say very little until she understood what she was looking at. So she watched. She learned the layout of the East Wing in the first 2 days, walking it methodically in the early mornings when the corridors were quiet. She learned which attendants were assigned to her, 3 of them, led by Petra, the young woman who had smiled at her in the mirror on her wedding morning. She learned where the kitchen was and, more importantly, that if she arrived at a specific side door of the kitchen at 7 in the morning, a cook named Owen would hand her a proper cup of tea without making a fuss about it, which was the only way she wanted tea delivered. She did not see Darius for the first 2 days. She heard him, his voice from behind closed doors, deep and unhurried, talking about things she could not make out, and she saw evidence of his presence everywhere. The palace ran with a kind of mechanical precision that made it clear someone was paying very close attention to all of it. Meetings happened on schedule. Staff moved with purpose. Nothing sat broken or unaddressed for longer than a few hours. On the 3rd day, she was in the East Garden, a long, neat space with gravel paths and carefully pruned hedges, reading the council orientation documents that Helen had sent to her rooms. She had not been required to attend any formal events yet, but she had been given a stack of materials that were clearly meant to tell her how things worked in this court, and she was working through them with the same focused attention she gave to medical literature. She heard footsteps on the gravel and looked up. Darius was walking through the garden with 2 of his advisors, a man with close-cropped gray hair named Lord Callum, and a younger man whose name she had not yet learned. They were talking as they walked, and they had not seen her yet. She watched for a moment, in the way she had learned to watch, quietly, without drawing attention to herself. Darius was saying something about the eastern border road that needed rebuilding. He was not raising his voice. He was simply stating what needed to happen and who was responsible for making it happen, and there was something in the way he said it that made it very clear the matter was not open for a long conversation. Lord Callum was nodding. The younger man was writing something. Then Darius looked up and saw her. He stopped walking. The 2 advisors continued for a step before they realized he had stopped, and then they stopped too, and there was a brief moment where all 3 of them were looking at her, and she was looking back. "Good morning," Darius said. "Good morning," Amara said. He said something quietly to his 2 advisors, and they nodded and continued on without him. He walked toward her instead, and Amara stayed very still, not from fear exactly, but from something she didn't have a clean word for yet. He looked at the documents in her hands. "The council orientation materials," he said. "Yes. You are reading them." "I am on the 3rd one," she said. Something shifted in his expression, very slightly. Not quite a smile, more like a settling, a small reduction in the controlled distance he kept around himself. "Most people leave those unread," he said. "That seems unwise," Amara said. He looked at her steadily for a moment. "It is," he said. "Then, how are the rooms?" "They are comfortable," she said. "They face east." He nodded, as though this was information he already had. "Helen tells me you have been mapping the palace." She thought about that for a moment. "Helen tells you things." "Helen tells me everything," he said. Not defensively, not as a warning, just as a fact. "I was not aware it was a problem," Amara said carefully, "to know where I am." "It is not a problem," he said. "I was going to say that if you want a proper map, there is one in the library. 3rd shelf from the left, near the window. It is more accurate than walking it alone." She looked at him. He looked back. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. Then he glanced at the documents in her hand. "The 3rd one is about court protocol. Most of it is accurate. The section on formal address is out of date by about 2 years. Ignore pages 11 through 14, and ask Helen for the current version." Then he turned and walked back in the direction his advisors had gone, and Amara watched him go and sat with the strange, quiet weight of a conversation she had not expected. She looked down at the documents. She turned to page 11 and read a few lines. Then she set those pages aside. She was not sure what she had expected from him. She had built up the idea of him over weeks of collected warnings and whispered stories, and the idea was large and dark and clear in its shape. The reality was harder to read. He was not warm, exactly. He was not the kind of person who filled a room with easy conversation or softened every edge, but he was precise. He was paying attention, and there was something in the way he paid attention that felt different from the cold indifference she had braced herself for. She went back to her reading. The fourth day brought the first formal lunch she was required to attend, a small gathering of senior court members and their partners, hosted in one of the mid-sized dining rooms. Helen prepared her with notes beforehand, and Amara read those notes the way she read everything, thoroughly and with her full attention. There were 14 people at the table. Darius sat at the head. Amara sat to his right, which she understood was significant. Across from her was Lady Cora, the wife of Lord Callum, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair and a very sharp, accurate way of looking at people. Next to Cora was a man named Lord Fenwick, who was the head of the court's financial council, and who had the kind of smile that arrived slightly before it was needed. The lunch was polite and careful. People were watching her, she knew. They were trying to take her measure without being obvious about it. She had sat across from patients who were doing the same thing, trying to figure out whether she could be trusted, and she had learned that the best response was not to perform confidence, but to simply be steady and let people see that she was paying attention. She talked when it made sense to talk. She asked one question about the Eastern Border Road, because she had heard Darius mention it in the garden and she was curious. Lord Callum answered at length, and she listened to all of it, and asked a follow-up about the supply lines involved, and she noticed that Callum's eyebrows moved in a way that suggested he had not expected the follow-up. Darius said nothing during that exchange, but she was aware, without looking directly at him, that he had gone slightly more still. Afterward, when the lunch was ending, and people were standing and putting on the small armor of public departure, Lady Cora found a way to be near Amara for a moment. She looked at Amara with the kind of directness that only comes from someone who has stopped caring about managing impressions. "You are smarter than they expected," Lady Cora said quietly. "I am not sure who they are," Amara said. "Everybody," Cora said simply, and moved away. Amara walked back to her rooms and sat with that for a while. It was not an insult, she decided. It was a piece of honest information, which she valued considerably more than false comfort. She was starting to understand that this court was a place full of performance. People performed loyalty, and performed warmth, and performed certainty about things they were not certain about at all. She had grown up watching her father perform respectability his whole life. She had spent years in hospital wards watching patients perform bravery when they were afraid. She was fluent in the difference between what people showed and what was true. What surprised her, the longer she paid attention, was that Darius did not seem to be performing anything. He was controlled, yes, he was private, but there was no gap, as far as she could see, between the way he acted in public and the way he moved when he thought fewer eyes were on him. He was exactly what he appeared to be, which made him, in the context of a court full of performance, almost startling. She thought about that late at night when she couldn't sleep, which was still most nights. A week after the wedding, she asked Petra, in the matter-of-fact way she asked most things, what people in the palace said about her. Petra was folding linens at the foot of the bed, and she paused for one moment before she answered. "Some say you are cold," Petra said carefully, "because I don't talk much." "Because you listen too much," Petra said, and then seemed to realize she had said something she hadn't planned to, and looked up. Amara considered that. "What do you think?" she asked. Petra held her gaze. "I think you are the first person I have met in this palace," she said slowly, "who asked me what I thought." That night, Amara lay awake longer than usual. Not from fear or grief this time. She was thinking. She was beginning to understand something about this place, about the world she had been dropped into without a map. She was beginning to understand that the world she had expected, cold and brutal and simple in its cruelty, was not the world she was actually in. The world she was actually in was much more complicated. And complicated, she had learned a long time ago she could work with. The second week inside the palace walls brought new routines, new faces, and a slowly building picture of where she was, and what kind of place it actually was. Amara was methodical about it. She had always been methodical. When she had started nursing, She had kept a small notebook where she wrote down everything she observed about each patient, every shift, until the patterns became clear, and the guesswork went away. She was doing the same thing now, except the patients were a palace, and a king, and a court full of careful, watching people. She had been placed on the schedule for 2 optional council briefings per week. Optional was the word Helen used, but Amara had learned enough to understand that in this environment, optional did not always mean what it said. She attended both briefings. She sat at the long table in the briefing room and listened to the council members present updates on the territory's governance, roads, trade agreements, supply distribution to the outer villages, disputes between local landowners. She did not speak unless she was addressed directly, and she was addressed directly only once, by Lord Fenwick, who asked in a pleasant voice what she thought about the proposed changes to the northern trade tariff. It was a test. She recognized the shape of a test. "I do not yet have enough information to have a useful opinion," she said, which was true. "But I would like to read the existing tariff structure if that is possible." Lord Fenwick smiled the smile that arrived before it was needed. "Of course," he said. The documents arrived in her rooms the following morning. She read all of them. What she found, working through the numbers over 2 evenings with a cup of Owen's tea beside her, was that the proposed changes would benefit 3 specific merchant groups in the central districts, while quietly increasing costs for the smaller traders in the outer villages, who already operated on very thin margins. It was not obvious if you read quickly. It was only obvious if you read carefully and knew what to look for. She sat with that for a full day before she decided what to do about it. She wrote a short note, precise, plain, with the relevant page numbers cited. She put it in an envelope and gave it to Petra to deliver. The following afternoon, Darius walked past her in the east corridor. He did not stop, but he slowed, and as he passed her he said, without looking at her, "The tariff proposal has been returned to the committee for revision." He said it the way someone might comment on the weather, and then he kept walking. Amara stood in the corridor after he was gone, and felt something settle quietly into place inside her chest. Not triumph, not relief exactly. Something smaller, and more specific than either of those things. The feeling that she had been useful. That what she could do, the attention she paid, the careful reading, the ability to find the thing that was buried in the numbers, had mattered here, in this place that was supposed to have nothing to do with her. She went back to her rooms and started reading the next set of documents. That same week, she discovered the stable yard. She had not been looking for it. She had been walking one of her morning routes, and taken a wrong turn through an arched gate, and ended up in a courtyard that smelled of hay and animals, and something clean and uncomplicated. There were several horses in the yard, and 2 stable workers moving quietly among them, and there was Darius, crouched down on one knee, beside a boy of perhaps 10, who was sitting on the ground with his arm held at an angle that made it immediately clear to Amara, whose brain catalogued injuries automatically, that something was wrong with it. She walked forward without thinking about it, the way she always walked toward someone who was hurt. "Let me see," she said, crouching down across from Darius. The boy looked at her with big eyes. She smiled at him briefly, and said, "My name is Amara." "What is yours?" "Percy," he said in a small voice. "Percy, I am going to look at your arm, all right? I am going to be very gentle, and I need you to tell me if anything I do makes it worse." He nodded. She looked at it carefully, pressing very lightly in the right places, watching Percy's face the whole time for the signals she was trained to read. When she was done, she sat back and looked at Darius, who had been completely still and silent the entire time she was working. "It is not broken," she said. "It is a hard sprain. It needs to be wrapped and rested, and he should not use it for lifting anything, for at least 2 weeks." Darius looked at Percy. "How did you fall?" Percy looked at the ground. "The ladder by the east loft," he said. "The 3rd rung is loose." Darius stood up. "The rung will be fixed today," he said. "Come to the kitchen, and someone will give you something cold for that arm, and something warm to eat. Then go home and rest." Percy got up carefully. He looked at Amara. "Thank you," he said. "You are very welcome," she said. She watched him make his way across the yard, and then straightened up and found Darius looking at her. "You did not go for the healer," he said. "The healer would have said the same thing," she said. "It would have just taken longer." He was quiet for a moment. "You are a nurse," he said, and it sounded less like information and more like someone placing a piece correctly. "I was," she said. "You are," he said. She looked at him. He did not look away. That evening, a new addition appeared in the briefing schedule on her desk. Her name had been added to the weekly health review meeting, which addressed medical supply distribution across the territory. It was not marked as optional. She looked at it for a long time, standing at her desk in the quiet of her east-facing rooms. Then she sat down, pulled the schedule toward her, and started reading the background materials. 2 days later, the health review meeting took place in a smaller room off the main council hall, with 7 people around the table. The head of the palace medical staff, a compact and serious man named Dr. Peter Hale, looked at Amara when she walked in with an expression that was almost too neutral, which told her everything she needed to know about how he felt about her presence. She sat down and listened. The meeting covered supply levels, distribution delays in the outer districts, a shortage of trained midwives in the northern villages, and a request from the eastern settlement for additional fever medication ahead of the cold season. Amara had questions. She kept most of them until the end, but when the meeting reached the point about midwives, she said, "The shortage in the northern villages. Is there a training program in place, or is recruitment the only current strategy?" Dr. Hale said, carefully, that recruitment was the primary approach. A short-term training program for local women, with existing caregiving knowledge, would be faster and more sustainable than recruiting from the central districts, Amara said. "I can put together a proposal, if that would be useful." There was a pause. "That would need the king's approval," Dr. Hale said. "Then I will write the proposal for him," Amara said. She wrote it that night, and submitted it the following morning. The approval came back in less than 24 hours. Dr. Hale found her in the corridor the next day. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I have spent 11 years running medical operations in this palace. No one has moved an initiative through approval in 24 hours. I was not aware there was a precedent to follow," Amara said. He looked at her a moment longer. Then he said, "The outer village data is a mess. If you have time, it would be useful to have someone look at it who knows what they are looking at." "I have time," she said. It was the beginning of something she had not anticipated. She had come into the palace expecting to be invisible at best, managed at worst. Instead, she was finding, slowly and without fanfare, that there were things here she could do. Real things. Things that mattered to real people, in real places. She had not planned for that. She had not planned for the particular, quiet steadiness of the man at the center of all of it either. The man who had sent her a note on her first night, telling her she was safe, and who had pulled a revision from the wrong tariff proposal without announcement, and who had waited, absolutely still, while she examined a child's arm in a stable yard. She did not think about it too directly. It was too new, and she was too careful a person to build a conclusion before she had enough information to support it. But she noticed. She was always noticing. And something she had packed very tightly away, some part of herself she had agreed to set aside when she walked through the palace gates, was beginning, very slowly and without her permission, to loosen. The library became hers by accident. She had gone there the first time because of the map, the one Darius had mentioned on their third morning, third shelf from the left near the window. She had found it exactly where he said it would be, unfolded it carefully on the long reading table, and spent an hour cross-checking it against the routes she had walked herself. It was accurate. It was also far more detailed than she had expected, marking not just the rooms and corridors but the original construction dates of each section, the utility passages, the gardens at every level. She had folded it back exactly as she found it, and been about to leave when she noticed the section on medical history. 2 hours later, she was still there. The library was enormous, with a ceiling that made the room feel like the inside of a very serious thought. It had the particular smell of old paper and wood polish that she associated with places where people came to do real thinking. She found books she had not expected to find, detailed records of the territory's public health initiatives going back 60 years, archived reports from the outer village physicians, a set of journals written by a palace physician from 3 generations ago that were so honestly observed they read almost like fiction. She started coming every night after dinner, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 3. She kept a notebook with her, a plain one she had found in the desk in her rooms, and she wrote down things she was learning, and questions she had, and ideas that came to her when she was reading the kind of material that made ideas want to come. She was there, on the 11th night of her marriage, at approximately 2 in the morning, when the lights in the main part of the library were still on. She had not thought anyone else would be there. The corridor outside had been completely dark and silent when she walked through it, and the library itself had been unlit when she arrived, and she had turned on only the lamp nearest the door, which gave her enough light to read by without flooding the whole room. She was sitting with a physician's journal open in her lap, her legs pulled up on the wide chair, a cup of tea gone cold on the table beside her, when she heard a sound from the far end of the room. She went very still. Then, around the edge of the tall shelving unit that divided the library's middle section, Darius appeared. He was carrying a book, and he was wearing a plain dark shirt with no formal jacket, and his hair, for the first time since she had arrived, was not precisely in order. He saw her and stopped. They looked at each other across the lamplit library at 2 in the morning. "I did not know you came here," he said. He did not sound startled. He sounded like a person recalibrating. "I did not know you did either," she said. He looked at the book in her hand. "What are you reading?" "The Journals of the Palace Physician, from the reign of your great-grandfather," she said. He was very observant, and very honest, which I suspect occasionally got him into trouble. Something changed in Darius's expression. Not much. A small, involuntary thing. "His name was Dr. Marcus Webb," he said. "He was here for 32 years. His grandson was a historian." She looked at the journal cover. She had not known the name. "Did you read these?" "When I was young," he said. "My father thought they were tedious. I thought they were the most interesting thing in the palace." She looked at him. He was standing with the book in his hand, and the lamp throwing a limited light between them, and the palace was completely quiet outside the library walls, and this was the most he had said to her at one time, since their conversation in the garden. "Sit down," she said, not quite meaning it as a suggestion. "If you were going to read." He looked at her for a long moment, then he walked to the chair at the far end of the reading table, and sat down, and opened his book, and the silence between them settled into something that was not uncomfortable, but was not nothing either. They read for a while. The library clock ticked. Amara's tea stayed cold. At some point he said, without looking up, "Why are you reading the medical histories?" "Because the current supply data Dr. Hale gave me does not make sense without understanding what came before it," she said. "The patterns in where the shortages happen are not random. They follow old administrative lines that were drawn 60 years ago and have not been updated. The map of the problem is a map of an old decision that nobody has revisited." He put his book down and looked at her. She became aware, in a way she hadn't been while she was talking, that she had said a great deal more than she usually said. "Nobody has revisited it," he said slowly, "because nobody went back far enough to find it." "That is my guess," she said. He looked at the journal in her hands. "When did you see it?" 3 nights ago." "You have been reading every night?" "Yes." "Why did you not bring this to the health review meeting?" "Because I am not certain yet," she said. "I do not bring things to meetings when I am not certain. I bring them when I have enough evidence to stand behind them." He looked at her in the way she had come to recognize, the way that meant he was taking something in and placing it somewhere specific, not just processing it and moving on. "How much longer before you are certain?" he asked. 1 or 2 more weeks, she said. "Maybe less, if the records from the Outer Eastern District are complete." "I will have them sent to you tomorrow," he said. She nodded. He picked up his book again, and she picked up hers, and they read in the same quiet space for another hour, before she realized she was struggling to keep her eyes open, and finally stood and said goodnight. And he said goodnight without looking up from his book, and she walked back through the dark corridor to her rooms. She lay in bed, and did not sleep immediately, and thought about how strange a thing it was, to sit in a library at 2 in the morning, with someone you did not know and feel, somehow, that you were not strangers. She thought about what he had said about Dr. Webb's journals. His father thought they were tedious. He thought they were the most interesting thing in the palace. She thought about the way he had said she was still a nurse, not was. She thought about a lot of things, lying in the dark with the east-facing windows going from black to very deep blue at the edges, where the night was beginning to think about ending. Then she fell asleep, and when she woke the records from the Outer Eastern District were already outside her door. Amara had been good at reading rooms her whole life. It was a skill that had grown out of necessity, the way most useful skills do. Growing up in a house where the atmosphere could change without warning had taught her to read small signals, the way someone held their shoulders, the particular quality of a silence, the very slight delay before someone answered a simple question. She had brought that skill into nursing, where it helped her know when a patient was more frightened than they were admitting, or more in pain than they were showing, and she had brought it here, into the palace, where it was more necessary than anywhere she had ever been. What she read, in the 3rd week of her marriage, was a change in the weather. Not outside. The days were clear and cool and consistent. Inside the palace, among the people who moved through it. It started small. A look that lasted a beat longer than it should have. A conversation that stopped when she walked into a room. A very specific kind of smile. The sort that showed teeth without reaching the eyes. She catalogued these things the way she catalogued everything, carefully and without jumping to conclusions, waiting until the pattern was clear enough to name. By the end of the 3rd week, the pattern was clear. There were people in this court who did not want her here. Not just in the abstract sense of preferring things to be different. People felt that way about lots of things, and mostly got on with their lives. This was something more deliberate. There were people who were actively working to make her position here feel uncertain. The first visible move came from Lord Fenwick. At a formal reception marking the anniversary of the territory's founding, Fenwick maneuvered himself to her side, during a moment when the crowd had shifted, and Darius was across the room, and he said, in a smooth and pleasant voice, that it must be challenging to navigate a court so different from one's background, and then, without pausing, he referenced her father's financial difficulties in a way that was perfectly calibrated to sound like sympathy, and function as a reminder that she came from weakness. Amara looked at him with complete steadiness. "I find most things manageable with enough attention," she said, and turned away. The second move was less visible but more pointed. A woman named Lady Sylvie Crane, who held a senior advisory position in the Social Council, and who moved through the court with the kind of ease that came from having been there for a very long time, began a quiet and sophisticated campaign that Amara recognized, not because it was obvious, but because she had seen its structure before. It was the kind of thing that left no fingerprints. A comment here, a suggestion there, a pattern of gentle implications that the new queen was perhaps too reserved, too focused on the medical work, not quite comfortable in the social requirements of her role. None of it was said directly. All of it was designed to build a particular picture. Amara watched and listened and kept her notebook and said nothing to anyone for 5 days. On the 6th day, she went to see Lady Cora. Lady Cora lived in the south wing with her husband Lord Callum, and her rooms were the warmest in the palace, not in temperature but in the way they were furnished. Books and soft chairs and a window seat full of cushions that had clearly been sat on many times. Cora received her without surprise, which suggested she had been expecting the visit. "You have noticed," Cora said, once they were seated with tea. "I have been noticing for about 3 weeks," Amara said. "I wanted to be sure about the shape of it before I talked to anyone." Cora looked at her with that accurate, direct gaze. "And the shape of it?" "Lord Fenwick is concerned about his influence. The trade revision made him look as though he had missed something, which he had, but he would prefer that to be less visible. Lady Crane has been here long enough to believe she understands what this court requires in a queen, and I do not fit her understanding. There may be others. Those are the 2 I am certain about." Cora was quiet for a moment. "You have been here 3 weeks, she said. 22 days, Amara said. Cora set down her tea. "What do you want to do about it?" "I want to know what tools I have," Amara said. "I do not want to move incorrectly. I have enough information about the problem. I do not yet have enough information about what kind of response this court respects." Cora looked at her for a long time. "The court respects results," she said finally, "and it respects people who do not flinch. But the most important thing you should know is that this court pays very close attention to Darius. Not because they are afraid of him, though some are, because he is consistent. People have learned that his assessments are accurate, and his assessment of you is still forming." "I know," Amara said. "So is yours of him," Cora said, and it was not quite a question. Amara looked at her tea. "Yes," she said honestly. Cora nodded once, in the way of someone who has confirmed something they already suspected. "The midwife training program you proposed," she said. The first session starts next week in the Northern District. I know. 12 women enrolled in the first week after the announcement. 3 of them walked 11 miles to register. Cora paused. That is the kind of thing that reaches people outside these walls faster than anything Sylvie Crane says inside them. Amara thought about that. About 12 women, and 11 miles. She drove back to her rooms, and sat at her desk for a while, without reading anything. Then she opened her notebook and wrote down the question that had been forming slowly at the back of her mind. What does it mean to have power in a place where power has always been used to take from people, rather than give to them? She did not write an answer. She was still working it out. The following week, the accusations became formal. She had not expected them to move so quickly. She had been watching, but she had been watching for the slow, patient kind of undermining, the kind that worked over months. She had not anticipated that someone would overplay their hand. Lord Fenwick submitted a formal query to the Court Records Office, requesting documentation of Amara's background and family connections, framing it in language that strongly implied concerns about foreign influence. Lady Crane, separately, raised a question in the Social Council about the appropriateness of the Queen's attendance at official health briefings, suggesting it fell outside traditional protocol. Neither of these things was said in the open. They were routed through official channels, dressed in procedural language, documented. Amara heard about both within 48 hours, because Helen told her, which meant Helen considered it relevant, which meant Helen had her own views about it, which Amara filed away. She went back to her rooms and opened her notebook and looked at everything she had documented. Then she spent an evening writing a careful, factual account of every incident she had observed or experienced since arriving at the palace. Every date, every name, every specific exchange. She kept the language neutral and precise, the way she wrote clinical notes. Just the facts, observed and recorded. She did not submit it anywhere. She kept it in the notebook and slept on it. 3 days later, the query about her background and the question about her role at health briefings were both referred to the full council for a formal review session. She was informed of this by Helen, who delivered the information with the same professional neutrality she always wore, but who held the door open for an extra second afterward, which was as close as Helen got to expressing an opinion. The review session was scheduled for Thursday morning. Amara spent Wednesday evening in the library, not reading the medical histories this time. She sat very still at the long reading table and thought about what was going to happen and what she wanted the outcome to be, and what the most important thing was that she needed to be true when she walked out of that room. Darius appeared at 10:30, which she had half expected, because they had both been coming to the library most nights now, and both of them knew it, and neither of them had said so. He sat down and looked at her across the table. "You know about Thursday," she said. "I convened Thursday," he said. She looked at him. "It needed a proper hearing," he said. "Not a procedural back channel. A hearing. On the record. Where the evidence can be examined. That is a risk for you," she said carefully. "Is it? If the hearing goes badly, it reflects on your judgment." He looked at her steadily. "The hearing will not go badly." She held his gaze. "You sound certain." "I have read your notebook," he said. She went still. "I did not give you my notebook." "No," he said. "I read the version you wrote for Dr. Hale's health review files, and the tariff analysis, and the proposal for the midwife training, and I have been watching you in every meeting you have attended for 3 weeks." He paused. "I am thorough," he said. "I thought you knew that." She sat with that for a moment. "And," she said. "And your judgment is accurate, and your motives are clear, and your documentation is precise," he said. "Anyone who examines the evidence will find what I have found. I intend to make sure they examine it." Amara looked at him across the library table, in the quiet of the palace at 10:30 at night, and felt something move through her that she did not try to name. "Why?" she said. It came out quieter than she meant it to. He was quiet for a moment. "Because you are right," he said, "and I do not allow wrong things to be treated as though they are right in my court." She looked at her hands on the table. Then she looked up at him. "I am going to bring the notebook," she said. "The one with all of it. I can walk the council through it." "Yes," he said, "I know." Thursday arrived gray and overcast, with the kind of light that made the palace feel heavier than usual. Or maybe that was just how Amara was experiencing it. She dressed with the same careful attention she gave everything, ate a proper breakfast because she had learned a long time ago never to face a difficult day without eating, and walked to the council chamber with her notebook and her written documentation, and the particular stillness she kept inside herself when something important was happening. The council chamber was a large room with a long oval table and tall windows on one side. When she walked in, all 12 council members were already seated. Darius was at the head of the table. Lord Fenwick was 3 seats to his left, with an expression that was perfectly composed in the way of someone who has rehearsed it. Lady Crane was across the room, seated slightly apart from the main grouping, in a way that looked like choice but read, to Amara, as distance. Lord Callum was there too. He looked at Amara when she entered, and his expression was neutral, but he nodded once, which was something. Helen was seated at a small desk near the door, taking formal minutes. She met Amara's eyes for exactly 1 second. Amara sat down in the chair that had been positioned at the end of the table, not a council seat, a presentation position, and placed her notebook in front of her and waited. Darius opened the session without preamble. He was precise about what was being reviewed, the formal query about background and the question about protocol. He made it clear that both matters would be addressed with evidence, on the record, with every claim examined against its documentation. Lord Fenwick spoke first. He was smooth and well-prepared, and his language was careful enough that each individual sentence sounded reasonable. He was raising concerns, he said, in the interest of the court's integrity. Amara listened to all of it without moving. When it was her turn, she opened her notebook and began. She was not dramatic about it. She did not raise her voice or use emotional language. She walked through each incident in order, with dates and names and specific words, and she kept her tone the same throughout. Measured, clear, factual, the way she would present a clinical case. As she spoke, she could see, around the table, the way people were receiving what she was saying. Some were very still. A few were looking at Fenwick. Lord Callum was looking at his hands, but in the way of someone listening very intently, not in the way of someone avoiding. When she finished, she closed the notebook. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Darius said, without particular emphasis, "Lord Fenwick, the tariff revision that was returned to committee last week. Walk me through your original analysis of it." Fenwick's composure was very good, but it moved slightly at the edges. He provided an answer that was technically accurate, but conspicuously incomplete. "The analysis you submitted," Darius said, "did not flag the impact on outer village traders. The analysis submitted to me in a private note, 11 days ago, did flag it. That note was from my wife." The word wife fell into the room in a specific way. Amara had heard him say it before in official contexts, and it always had a formal weight to it. This time it had something else. "The protocol question," Darius continued, turning his attention to the far side of the table, "regarding the Queen's attendance at health briefings. I authorized that attendance personally, based on her professional qualifications and the value of her contributions. If there is a protocol concern, it is a concern about my authorization. I would like to hear that argument directly." Lady Crane said nothing. The session lasted another hour, during which every item on the formal query was addressed and found to have no evidentiary basis. By the end, the procedural language had been stripped away, and what remained was very clear and not complicated at all. When the session closed and the council members began to stand, Darius said something quiet to Lord Callum, who nodded. He said something else to the member on his right. Then the room gradually emptied, until it was just the two of them and Helen, who gathered her minutes with quiet efficiency and slipped out. Amara was still sitting at the presentation chair, her notebook in front of her, the weight of the last 2 hours settling slowly. Darius walked to the end of the table and stood across from her. He looked at her for a moment. "You held very still in there," he said. "I always hold still when it matters," she said. "I know," he said. He paused. "Fenwick will recalibrate. He is pragmatic. Crane is less pragmatic, but she understands what she saw today." "And the others?" Amara said. "The others saw what they needed to see," he said simply. She looked at him. "What did they need to see?" He met her eyes. "That you are not standing alone," he said. She held that sentence in her mind carefully, the way she held things that needed to be looked at properly. He had not said it with heat or declaration. He said it the way he said most things, with the quiet precision of someone who meant exactly what they said, and nothing more and nothing less. "Thank you," she said. It was not enough, but it was honest. He nodded once. Then he said, "The midwife training program. The first session is on Monday. The Northern District Coordinator sent a report. The enrollment is now at 23. She looked at him. 23? From the original 12, he said. Word spread. She sat with that for a moment. 23 women. Word spreading to people she had not met and might never meet, about a thing she had proposed in a late-night reading session, with out-of-date records, and the kind of stubbornness she had always carried with her everywhere she went. She did not know what to say. She did not say anything. Darius turned and walked toward the door. Then he stopped, without turning, and said, "The library is open until midnight. I generally go later than that, but the official hours are midnight." She looked at the back of him. She understood what he was saying. "I know the hours," she said. He left. She sat in the empty council chamber for a while after he was gone, in the gray light from the tall windows, and thought about the shape of where she was. 3 weeks ago she had walked through palace gates with her jaw set and her hands trembling, certain she was walking into something she would have to simply endure. She was still certain about very little. That had not changed. But the thing she was certain she was enduring had changed shape significantly, and it was changing more every day. And she was a person who followed evidence wherever it led, no matter how unexpected the destination. She picked up her notebook and stood up and walked back toward her rooms through the quiet corridors of the palace, and when she passed Owen's kitchen door, the side one, he was there, and without either of them saying a word, he handed her a cup of tea. She took it with both hands and kept walking. Amara did not talk about what she was feeling. She never had. She processed things internally, in the careful, methodical way she processed everything, turning a thing over and examining it from every angle before she decided what it was or what to do about it. Feelings were complicated because they did not sit still the way evidence did. They kept shifting and revealing new surfaces, and she never quite felt like she had enough information to conclude anything about them with confidence. What she knew, by the 4th week of her marriage, was this: she was not afraid of the palace anymore. She was not afraid of the court, or its politics, or the complicated machinery of a life she had not chosen. She had found her footing here, in the way she always found footing, by working, by paying attention, by being useful in ways that were real and not just performed. What she was less sure about was harder to name. There was a morning, a Tuesday, where she came downstairs early, earlier than usual, before even Owen's kitchen side door was open, and found Darius at the long window at the end of the east corridor, standing with a cup of something, and looking out at the garden. He did not hear her coming, because she moved quietly, a habit from hospital night shifts, and she was 10 feet away before he turned. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then he said, "You are up early." "So are you," she said. He looked back at the window. "I don't sleep long," he said. "Neither do I," she said. She stood beside him at the window, and they both looked out at the garden, gray and still, in the early morning, and after a moment, he held out his cup. She looked at it. It was tea. She took it, because she had not yet been to Owen's, and she wanted tea, and she had a sip and handed it back, and they stood there, in the quiet corridor, watching the light change over the garden, and it was one of the most ordinary moments she had experienced since arriving, and it was, she noticed, perfectly comfortable. He saved her the last of the good tea after that, not every morning, but often enough that it became a thing she noticed when it happened, and noticed when it didn't. She began to notice other things. He remembered things. He mentioned, in passing, 3 weeks after she had said it once, in a late-night library conversation, that she had described Owen's side door method as the only sensible way to get tea in this palace, and that he had started using it himself. He brought her the cultural history of a festival being planned for the outer villages, not because she had asked for it, but because she had mentioned, briefly, that she didn't understand the context. He did not make a show of these things. He simply did them, and she catalogued them in the careful part of her mind that tracked patterns. The pattern was clear. It was becoming clearer every day. She was not sure what to do with it. She had never been the kind of person who fell easily into things. She thought before she trusted. She was careful with herself in the specific way of someone who had learned, early in life, that impulsive openness was a way to get hurt. She gave her trust incrementally, and she took it back if it was misused. and she had always been fine with that method. What was happening now was something she didn't have a clean category for. She wasn't falling into anything. She was arriving somewhere slowly and with her eyes open, and the destination kept turning out to be different from the one she had prepared for. One evening she was in her rooms, working through a set of outer district health reports, when Petra knocked and brought in dinner on a tray. Amara thanked her, and ate without stopping what she was reading, and when she was done, Petra, who was still there collecting the tray, said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," Amara said, because she had told Petra she could. "Were you scared when you came here?" Amara looked up from the reports. "Yes," she said. Petra nodded. "The staff talked about you a lot, in those first days, before you came, about what you would be like." She paused. "Some people thought you would be difficult, because of how it happened, being brought here the way you were. And now?" Amara said. Petra seemed to consider how to say something. "People have changed their minds," she said carefully. "The kitchen staff, the stable workers, the people in the outer districts, from the midwife program. You talk to people the way you actually see them." Amara was quiet for a moment. "I was trained to," she said. "In nursing, you learn to see people accurately, because everything you do depends on it." "It is not only training," Petra said, and then looked like she had said too much, and picked up the tray and left. Amara sat with that in the quiet room, the health reports still open on her desk. Then she wrote in her notebook, 12 women became 23. Word spreads when something is real. She was starting to understand that what she built here, the careful, methodical work she had been doing since the very first week, was not separate from what she was becoming. It was the same thing. Every person she treated as a real person. Every problem she dug into honestly. Every time she held still in a hard room and said the true thing, it was all the same project, and the project was not just about surviving here. She had not expected to belong anywhere inside these walls. She had expected to manage, to endure, to remain herself in a place that wanted to swallow her into its own definitions. What was actually happening was different. She was not being swallowed. She was not disappearing. She was here, fully here, more purposefully here than she had been in years, and the part of her that had been tensed against it since the beginning was slowly, reluctantly loosening its grip. One night in the library, late, with the familiar quiet and the lamp and the clock ticking, she looked across the table at Darius, reading something with the focused stillness he brought to everything, and she thought about the fact that a man she had been prepared to fear had become the most straightforward presence in a place full of complicated ones. He looked up, the way he sometimes did when he felt her looking at him. "The second regional health report," she said, because she needed to say something. "There is a gap in the mortality data from the Southern Valley. 2 years of records that are simply not there." "I know," he said. "There was a fire in the district records office. The historian's archive in the city has partial copies. Can I access them?" "I will arrange it," he said. He went back to his reading. She went back to hers. The clock ticked. She thought about the word arrange. She thought about how many things, since she had arrived, he had simply arranged, quietly and without announcement, based on things she needed. Not things she had formally requested. Things she needed. She thought about the fact that she knew now, with some certainty, that he slept less than most people, that he preferred to read late at night in a room that was quiet, that he thought the palace physician from 3 generations ago was interesting for the same reasons she did, that he liked strong tea, that he walked the eastern garden in the early mornings when the weather was clear, that his voice went quieter rather than louder when something mattered. She thought about the fact that she had married him 4 weeks ago in a ceremony she had no choice in attending, and had walked through those doors with her hands trembling, and had been certain she knew what she was walking toward. She had been wrong. She was big enough to know it. She did not try to name what she was feeling. It was too early, and she was too careful, and the thing itself was still forming, still becoming its own shape. But she did not try to talk herself out of it either, which was new. She simply let it be there, in the quiet library, on the other side of the lamp from a man who was still, in many ways, a mystery to her, but a mystery that was getting steadily clearer, and one that she found, despite every expectation, she genuinely wanted to solve. By the time the plague warnings came, Amara was 6 weeks inside the palace walls. The first reports were from the Eastern District, quiet and preliminary, a cluster of fever cases in 3 villages, unusual in their speed and pattern. The language in the initial report was careful, the kind of careful that meant people were worried, but not yet certain how worried to be. She read the report at the health review meeting and felt the familiar alertness move through her the way it always had when something in a patient's chart didn't align. Dr. Hale presented the situation with appropriate gravity, but also with the caution of someone who did not want to cause alarm before alarm was warranted. He outlined a monitoring plan. He talked about sending additional medical supplies to the district physician. Amara asked 3 questions. 2 of them Hale answered. The third, about whether anyone had cross-referenced the symptom pattern against the records from the territory's last major illness outbreak, 40 years ago. He paused on. "We do not have immediate access to those records," he said. "I do," she said. "I will look tonight." She looked that night, and the night after, and by the end of the second night, she had a clear and very specific concern about what the pattern might indicate, and what it would mean if she was right. She wrote it up with the same precision she brought to everything, and submitted it to Hale and to Darius simultaneously. By the following morning, the quiet monitoring plan had become something considerably larger. Additional physicians were being mobilized. Supply orders were going out. The outer district coordinator was called in for a direct briefing. She was in the middle of all of it, not as an observer, but as the person with the historical data, the person who had done the reading, the person who had connected the pattern before anyone else had seen it. On the third day, when it became clear that the situation was moving faster than the remote coordination could manage, she told Petra she was going. "Going where?" Petra said. "To the Eastern District," Amara said. She was already packing the medical supplies she had requested from the palace's stores. Not all of them, not more than her share. Just what she could carry, and what she would need. The physicians there are good, but they are not enough, and they need people who can work. "The protocol for travel," Petra began. "I am aware of the protocol," Amara said. "I am going." She left the following morning at 6. She told Helen, in a note she left on Helen's desk, where she was going, and why, and what she intended to do. She did not wait for a response. The Eastern District was 4 hours by road, through country that grew steadily more rural, and eventually more spare. The kind of landscape that reminded her of how large the territory actually was, and how different the edge of it was from the center. She arrived in the late morning, and by noon she was inside the makeshift treatment space the district physician, a tired man named Dr. Edwin Cross, had established in a community hall. It was bad. Not the worst she had seen. She had been a nurse in a city hospital, and she had seen things she carried with her quietly. But it was serious, and it was moving, and there was not enough of anything. Not enough hands, not enough supplies, not enough hours in the day. She found Edwin, and introduced herself without title or ceremony. "Tell me what you need most," she said. He looked at her for a moment. This man who had been managing an emergency alone for a week, and his face did something that she recognized as the expression of someone who had been holding everything together by themselves for longer than was sustainable, and had just been told they didn't have to anymore. "Someone who can run the intake assessment," he said. "I cannot keep up with it, and the treatment both." "I will run intake," she said, and she moved to the table he pointed at, and she started. She worked for 14 hours on the first day. She worked for 12 on the second. She stopped to sleep for 4 hours, and eat when someone made her, and the rest of the time she worked. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. There was a particular kind of clarity that came from being in a hard situation, where everything was immediate and real, and the stakes were visible in front of you, rather than buried in documents and protocols and carefully worded council presentations. She moved through the community hall with the same precise, steady attention she had always brought to a ward, and the people around her adjusted to her rhythm quickly, because it was clear and consistent, and it did not waste anything. On the second day, additional supplies arrived from the palace, more than she had asked for. On the third day, Darius arrived. She was in the middle of an intake assessment when she became aware of a shift in the room, the particular change in atmosphere that happens when someone with significant presence walks in. She did not look up immediately. She finished what she was doing, recorded her notes, and then turned around. He was at the door, with 2 assistants and 2 of the palace's senior physicians. He had clearly traveled quickly. There was dust on his coat, and his expression was that focused, for contained thing he wore when he was managing something he found serious. He saw her and walked directly over. "You left without clearance," he said. His voice was quiet, which meant it mattered. "I left with everything I needed," she said. "And I told Helen. Helen is not a clearance. There was not time for clearance." He looked at her, and she looked back, and something happened in the space between them that was more complicated than an argument. She held his gaze, and did not move, and he held hers, and then he looked away first, not in defeat, but in the way of someone who is setting something aside for later. "The 2 physicians I brought have experience with respiratory fevers," he said. "What do you need them to do?" She told him. For the next 3 weeks, they worked in the same space. It was unlike anything she had experienced, living and working inside the same crisis with the same person day after day. There was no room for formality. There was no space for the careful social distance they had kept in the palace. They were 2 people, solving an immediate problem together, and everything that was not necessary got stripped away. She saw him move through the community hall with the same precise attention he brought to everything, talking to Edwin with real respect, talking to patients with a directness that was not harsh but was honest, doing things that no one would have expected a king to do, carrying water, helping move a cot, sitting beside a man who had no family, and holding his hand for 20 minutes while he was afraid. She watched that last thing from across the room, and felt something she had been carefully not identifying move through her chest. He saw her in ways she had not expected either. He saw her on the days when she was exhausted and running on the particular stubborn energy that had always carried her through hard shifts. He saw her make a mistake in an intake assessment on the 13th day, when her attention slipped for a moment, and corrected immediately, without self-criticism, just correction, and move on. He saw her sit with a woman who had lost her daughter, and not speak at all, just sit, which was what the woman needed, and which Amara had known without being told. He said nothing about any of these things, but she was aware that he was watching, in the same way she was watching him, and that what they were each seeing was true. On the 18th day, the fever cases began to stabilize. On the 21st day, Edwin declared the acute phase over. People still needed care and treatment and follow-up, but the emergency was no longer a crisis. That evening, for the first time in 3 weeks, there was nothing immediate to do. Amara sat outside on a low stone wall at the edge of the community hall yard, in the early evening air, which was cool and clean after the closed warmth of the treatment space, and she let herself stop. She heard footsteps, and then Darius was beside her, not quite sitting, half leaning against the wall a few feet away. They were quiet for a while. The village was quiet around them. "Edwin says you diagnosed the pattern before anyone else," he said. "I had the historical records," she said. "You went back far enough to find them," he said. He had said something like that before, she remembered. In the library, about the tariff lines. "It is what I do," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You were right to come. I was wrong to want you to wait." She looked at him. He was looking at the village, at the low light over the houses. "I know it was not ideal," she said. "I was not concerned about ideal," he said. "I was concerned about you, traveling alone to a fever outbreak." He paused. "I do not manage that well." She sat with that. "Being concerned?" she said. "Not knowing if someone He stopped, recalibrated, quietly. "Not knowing if someone is safe," he said. She looked at his profile. The evening light and 3 weeks of difficult work had softened some of the controlled precision he usually wore. He looked, she thought, more human here than she had ever seen him look. "I was safe," she said. "I know," he said. "Now." They sat in the quiet evening outside the community hall, 3 weeks from the palace, and the air smelled of grass and cooking fires from the village, and something clean that Amara couldn't name. And the weight of the past weeks sat on both of them, in the specific way of things that had been real, and difficult, and worth doing. She thought about the man she had married, and the man she was sitting beside, and the distance between those two things, and how it was still measurable in days and conversations, and shared late hours, and how it was getting smaller. She did not say any of this out loud. But she was not saying it because she was afraid. She was not saying it because it was not yet fully formed, and she was a person who waited until she was certain. She was getting closer. They came back to the palace on a Thursday, in the early afternoon. The journey felt different from the journey out, quieter, in a way that had nothing to do with noise. They had been 4 hours apart from the palace going out. They were 4 hours closer to something else coming back. And Amara spent a portion of the drive looking out the window at the landscape and thinking about that. The palace received them with the kind of organized efficiency that meant Helen had been preparing for their return. Fresh rooms, fresh clothes, a sequence of medical consultations for both of them because Edwin had insisted on proper post-exposure checks, and a full schedule of briefings and updates that had accumulated during their absence. Amara sat through her medical check, answered all the questions honestly, drank the hydration solution the palace physician insisted on, and then went to her rooms and sat on the edge of her bed and did nothing for approximately 15 minutes. She did not try to do anything. She just let herself be still. Then she opened her notebook. What she wrote was not clinical. It was a kind of reckoning, the sort she had only done a few times in her life, at the moments when something had changed enough that she owed herself an honest accounting of it. She had arrived here 6 weeks ago with a suitcase full of carefully controlled expectations and a complete certainty about what she was walking into. She had been wrong about almost all of it, not about the difficulty. It was difficult, and it had required everything she had, and there were days she would not pretend had been easy. But she had been wrong about the nature of the difficulty. She had prepared for one kind of hard thing and found a completely different kind. She had found a place where she could actually do something, where the things she knew and the things she was good at were real and needed and not just tolerated. She had found a court full of complexity and politics and human difficulty, and she had navigated it by being exactly herself, which was something she had not been entirely sure she would be allowed to be. And she had found Darius. She wrote his name in her notebook and then looked at it for a moment. It was the first time she had written it without the title before it. She thought about 23 women walking to register for a training program. She thought about the stable yard and a boy named Percy. She thought about the library at 2 in the morning and tea in a corridor at dawn. She thought about the community hall in the Eastern District and 3 weeks of shared difficult work and an evening on a stone wall when he had said not knowing if someone is safe and stopped mid-sentence. She thought about the fact that she had spent 4 hours in a car with him coming back and the silence had been comfortable the whole way, and that she had noticed the moment the palace came into view, because she had felt something settle in her chest, not dread the way it had the first time, but something else. She closed the notebook. She got up, washed, put on clean clothes, and went to find Owen's kitchen door. He was there. He handed her tea without ceremony. She took it with both hands, standing in the late afternoon light of the side courtyard, and felt the rightness of the ordinary thing. She was finishing the tea when she heard footsteps and looked up, and Darius was crossing the courtyard. He stopped when he saw her, with the small recalibration that happened when he encountered her somewhere unexpected. Then he looked at the cup in her hands. "Owen's side door," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at the door. Owen appeared, regarded him, and went back inside without a word. A moment later the door opened again, and Owen held out a cup. Darius took it. He looked at Amara. She looked back. They stood in the side courtyard of the palace drinking tea in the late afternoon and said nothing, and it was one of the most complete silences she had ever inhabited. After a while he said, "The health review meeting is tomorrow. There will be a full debrief on the Eastern situation." "I know," she said. "I have already prepared notes." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "You looked at my notebook?" "I looked at your schedule," he said. "I could see from the timing that you had been working since we arrived." He paused. "You should rest." "I will rest after the notes," she said. He looked at her with an expression she had learned to read, the one where he was deciding whether to say something. "You do not have to do everything immediately," he said. "Neither do you," she said. And yet, something shifted in his expression. The small, involuntary thing. "You have a point," he said. "I usually do," she said. He looked at her over his teacup and she could see it. The thing she had been watching accumulate for weeks, the way his controlled distance had been reducing incrementally every day, the way the expressions he allowed himself had been getting gradually less managed. He was, she understood, someone who had learned very early to keep most of himself behind a wall, and the wall was very well built, but walls had gates, and she had been finding them one by one, without particularly intending to. She thought about what she had written in her notebook. She thought about the stone wall outside the community hall and the evening light. She was certain now, or close enough to certain, that the remaining gap did not change the conclusion. "I would like to tell you something," she said. He waited. "When I arrived here," she said carefully, "I had decided very firmly what this was going to be. What you were going to be." She looked at him directly. "I was wrong. I would like you to know that I know I was wrong." He was very still. "I am a thorough person," she continued. "I do not change my assessments until I have enough evidence. It took me some time to have enough evidence." She paused. "I have it now." "Evidence of what?" he said quietly. She held his gaze. "That this is not what I thought it was," she said. "And that you are not who I thought you were." He was quiet for a long moment. The courtyard was still around them, the late afternoon slipping toward evening. "What did you think I was?" he said. "Someone to be afraid of," she said. "And now?" She looked at him, at the gray-green eyes and the controlled precision, and all the small things she had collected and catalogued, and placed carefully in the right order, and she said honestly, "Someone I would like to keep knowing." He looked at her for a long time. The wall was there, it was always there, but the gate was open, and she was standing in it, and he was letting her stand there. "I would like that too," he said. And the thing was so quietly said, so precisely meant, that it required no elaboration at all. She nodded once, he nodded once. Then they finished their tea in the side courtyard as the evening came in, and went back inside separately but not apart, and the palace was the same place it had always been, large and old and full of complicated people and history, and the weight of old decisions, but it did not feel the same. It had not felt the same for a while, and standing in the courtyard, she was finally letting herself admit it. The morning after they came home from the Eastern District, Amara woke before the sun was fully up. She lay in the dark for a moment, in the east-facing room that had been hers for 6 weeks, and had stopped feeling temporary somewhere along the way, and she listened to the palace. It was quieter in the early morning than at any other time. The night staff had stepped back, and the day staff had not yet fully arrived, and the building settled into itself in those hours, in a way that felt honest, the way things feel when no one is performing for anyone. She got up. She put on warm clothes, and went to Owen's side door, and got tea, and carried it through the east corridor to the garden, which was wrapped in the particular blue-gray light of early morning. She sat on the stone bench near the center path, and held the cup in both hands, and let the quiet be around her. She had been thinking, since the conversation in the courtyard, about what came next. Not in a worried way. She was past that. She was thinking in the way of someone who has arrived somewhere unexpected, and is deciding how to settle in properly. She had come here, with nothing she had chosen. She had not chosen the marriage, or the man, or the palace, or the role. All of it had been placed in front of her like a map she had not asked for, and was required to follow. She had found, in the strange and difficult and ultimately revealing process of following it, that the destination was not what the map had suggested. What she was building here was real. The midwife program in the Northern District was real, and it was growing, and the women in it were learning things that would stay with them, and spread further than she could track. The work she had done in the Eastern District was real, and Edwin had already sent a formal proposal to establish a permanent connection between the Palace Health Council and the Outer District physicians, with her named as the point of contact. The analysis she had done on the administrative lines and the supply distribution had been passed to a policy working group. She was here. She was actually here, in a way that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with the fact that there were things in this place that needed doing, and she was the right person to do them. And then there was Darius. She had thought, in those first terrifying weeks, that the best possible outcome was a kind of armed neutrality. Two people who had been placed in proximity by other people's decisions, and who managed that proximity with dignity and minimal damage. She had thought that was the ceiling. She had, as she had acknowledged to him in the courtyard, been wrong. She heard footsteps on the gravel, and looked up. He was crossing the garden with a cup in his hand, heading toward the east path, and he saw her, and slowed. She lifted her cup slightly. He changed direction and came to the bench. "You are early," he said. "I woke up," she said. "You?" "I woke up," he said. He sat on the bench beside her. Not close, but close enough that she was aware of the proximity. They looked at the garden, which was gray and still and slowly brightening. "The health review debrief is at 9, he said. "I know," she said. "I have the notes." He nodded. Then, after a moment, "Edwin sent a formal commendation yesterday." "I know," Helen told me. "He said you were the most effective field physician he had ever worked alongside." "I am not a physician," she said. "He knows," Darius said. "He said it anyway." She looked at her tea. 23 women in the north. Edwin's formal commendation. The supply distribution reform that was now moving through the policy group. The Eastern District, stabilized. She thought about the empty apartment with the east-facing window, the curtain she had taken down and packed, the life she had built and then lost. She thought about how she had grieved that, in the first weeks. Not loudly, she was not loud about grief, but genuinely. The loss of what had been hers. She still missed parts of it. Clara's company. The man in room 7, the particular freedom of walking to work in the morning, knowing exactly what she was doing and why. But she was not the person she had been when she walked through those gates. She had grown here, not in a way she had chosen, but in a way that was real. She had been asked to be more than she had expected, and she had found that she was capable of it. And that discovery, quiet and earned, and hers, was worth something she could not easily calculate. "I want to go back," she said. He looked at her. "To the Eastern District," she said, "not for an emergency. As a regular thing. Once a month, perhaps. Edwin's proposal is a good one, and it should have follow-through." He looked at her steadily. "With clearance," he said. She looked at him. "With clearance," she said. "And with a guard if that makes it easier." Something in his expression settled. "It makes it easier," he said. And she heard what that meant clearly enough. "All right," she said. They sat in the early morning with their tea, and the garden getting gradually lighter around them, and Amara thought about the shape of things. She had grown up in a world where the people who were supposed to keep her safe had put their own interests first. She had learned, from that, to keep herself safe by keeping most people at a careful distance. It was a good system. It had served her well. She had not expected to find a person who did not require that system, who was not trying to take anything from her or manage her into something smaller, who paid attention not in the way of someone gathering information for their own purposes, but in the way of someone who simply found her worth paying attention to. She finished her tea. He finished his. The garden was fully light now. "The briefing room will be set up early today," he said. "Helen's doing." "Helen anticipates everything," Amara said. "It is why I trust her completely," he said. He paused. "I do not trust completely easily." "I know," she said. Because she did. She had watched him. He was precise about trust, the way he was precise about everything. He did not give it as a performance, or withhold it as a power move. He extended it when he had sufficient evidence, and not before. She thought about evidence. She thought about all the evidence she had now. "Neither do I," she said. She looked at him directly, in case that was not clear. He held her gaze, and there it was again, the thing in his expression that he could not fully control, the small and involuntary warmth that appeared at the moments when she said something that reached through the wall. "It was clear," he said quietly. She stood up and took both their cups to return to Owen, and walked back through the east corridor to her rooms, to prepare her notes for the 9 o'clock briefing. And the palace was waking up around her, the day staff moving through the corridors, the sound of the kitchen and the distant voices, all of it familiar now, in a way it had not been 6 weeks ago. She was about to turn the corner to the east wing, when he said, from behind her, "Amara." She turned. He was standing in the corridor, with the morning light coming through the windows behind him. "The Southern Province Medical Consultation," he said. "The one you proposed for the Health Council." "Yes," she said. "I have asked the travel office to arrange it. 3 days, starting next week. Full support from the council. Your name, as the lead representative." She looked at him. "That was fast." "You submitted the proposal 4 days ago," he said. "I do not leave things sitting that matter." She looked at him standing in the morning light, in the corridor that she now knew by heart, in the palace that had once felt like a thing to endure, and had become something else entirely, and she felt the particular fullness of a moment that does not announce itself, but is significant anyway. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. She turned to go, and then stopped. She turned back. For the record, she said, you are the most careful person I have ever met. He looked at her. I mean that as a compliment, she said. The corner of his mouth moved, the smallest thing, but she caught it, because she was always watching. I know, he said. She walked down the corridor to her rooms, and the notes were already in order on her desk, and the light was coming through the east-facing windows, clean and honest and steady. And outside in the southern province, people were waiting for someone to come and pay proper attention to what they needed. She sat down, opened her notebook to a fresh page, and wrote the date at the top. Then she started writing. She had expected, when she arrived here, to count days until something changed or ended, or resolved, into whatever it was eventually going to be. She had been counting wrong. The days had not been a countdown. They had been a building, slow and specific and made from real things, from cups of tea, and late-night reading, and supply reports, and a boy named Percy in a stable yard, and 23 women who walked miles to learn something that would help other people. From one honest conversation at a time, with a man she had once expected to fear. She was a long way, in every direction that mattered, from the woman who had sat in an empty apartment and felt the whole of her life close over her like a door. She was here. She had chosen, in all the ways that mattered, to be here. And whatever was still coming, the complications and the politics and the long work ahead, all the things she had not yet figured out, and the questions she had not yet answered, she was going to face them the way she faced everything. With clear eyes, with her notebook open, with the quiet, earned certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be.